Darling, you send me.
Well, hello, lovely humans, and welcome back to my channel. In this week's video, we are doing another episode of Homemade Holidays, where I am DIYing and or thrifting and upcycling different things to give as gifts. And in this week's video, we are going to DIY some candles. Here's why I love candles, okay? I just love them, first of all, in my own home because they're just so pretty and they smell so good and they make a great mood. And I have a thing for candles. I also love candles because they're so easy to give. It's for those moments where someone's like, hey, I brought you a gift. And you're like, oh, great, I don't have anything for you. Not today, not anymore. If you DIY some candles, you can be like, cool, I got it ready for you. Merry Christmas. The second reason I love giving candles as gifts is it's likely not going to clash with anybody's decor. Have you ever received a gift from somebody and you're like, that's not my style at all? But the good news about candles is they're so tiny that most likely they're not going to clash with just about anything unless you go garish, which I don't recommend. This is also a great activity to do with your kids. I personally didn't do it with mine because I was filming it for a video and I figured it would go a lot faster if there weren't tiny hands helping, but it is an easy enough craft that you can involve the whole family in. And the reason that I personally love DIY candles the most is because I get to pick the vessels that they go in. And I love picking unique vessels because they're gonna be unlike anything you can find in a store. And it gives me so much more creative freedom. So I'm super excited to be sharing this week's homemade holiday DIY. So without further ado, let's just jump right on into it. What are you doing? I don't know. Supplies you're gonna need. Unique vessels, obviously. I got these at Goodwill, a set of 5 for $2.99. And then I got this, I think it's like a candy dish. It was $1.99. And then this cutie little canister with a lid, thank you very much. How much do we love this? And then of course, classic quintessential mason jar because I'm basic. Some knockoff essential oils for scents. I also grabbed some of these Glade wax melts for a more intense scent. I also happen to have some dried lavender on hand that I want to give it a shot as well. And a paintbrush. I know this one seems weird, but bear with me, it'll make sense soon. Some wax crayons to add a little bit of color, which is probably why I didn't do this with my kids at home, so then they'd know I use their crayons. And then lastly, the Wicks and the wax. I've linked both these down below for you. And then you're gonna wanna start your double boiler, which is basically a bowl inside a bowl of water. And get your vessels ready. Next up, adding the wicks to the vessels. I added a dab of glue to the bottom of the wick just to get it to stay. Now, some people will dip them into the wax beforehand, but my wax technically wasn't even melted yet, so I had to come up with a new plan. Voila! For this size candle, I used about a cup of wax and it seemed to be perfect. So go ahead and pour that into the bowl inside your double boiler and prepare yourself for about 15 minutes of staring at it, waiting for something to happen, with a lot of occasional stirring, because you feel like that speeds up the process. I don't know if it sped up the process, but it felt satisfying to me, so I kept doing it. Now, I could have already added the scents at this point, but for some reason with this one, I decided to wait until the wax had completely melted. Tossed in 2 of those Glade wax melts and a couple of red crayons for some color. And gave it a little stir because I kind of wanted to see what color red it would come out to be. Found that it was just a bit too punchy for my taste, so I added a touch of a brown crayon to really deepen up the color a little bit. Because this scent was really, really appley and not very cinnamony, I just added a touch of cinnamon essential oil. Okay, and by a touch, I mean about 20 drops. It was a little more than a touch. And gave it a really good stir to make sure everything was combined. And this is probably why I should have added the wax melts earlier, because they took forever to melt. One last quick stir before pouring it into my candle base. Candle bowl? Candle vessel. And off camera, I've already rubber banded 2 chopsticks together to hold the wick upright because once the hot wax hits, the wax on the outside of the wick melts really quickly and it'll fall over, so you definitely need those. It would make sense to pour this out of a bowl with a spout on it because of that. Right there. I made a mess, you guys, so do as I say and not as I did because there's now red wax probably gonna be permanently on my counter for like a very long time, but it was worth it because I'm doing it for the tube. This time around, I decided to add an orange crayon and a bergamot oil. How the heck do you pronounce that? Early on in the melting process, just because I didn't see the point of waiting to the last minute. In this particular one, I wanted to put in that amber canister, and I got wise this time and laid down a mat beforehand so I didn't make a big mess on my actual counter. This one ended up taking about 2 cups of wax, which I was surprised by. So I added one with color and one without, just for a nice muted tone. And then for the candy dish, because it's so wide, I made it into a double wick instead and left the wax clear. With my chopsticks already in place, those wicks are not going anywhere. Okay, so let's pause it for just a sec. We're gonna be real about this candle. I went down the Pinterest rabbit hole and I found a blog about making a dried lavender candle, and it sounded so bougie and so cool, so I decided to give it a try. This was difficult. It was difficult, and I need to say that now so my narration and frustration better makes sense as we're moving forward. I'm fine with the final product, but I'm hoping that maybe someone else watching this has a better idea of how to pull this off, or let's let the film roll, shall we? So I cut down a bunch of dried lavender stems measured to the height of the glass jar. And in this tutorial that I found, which of course I'll link below, it said to paint wax onto the dried lavender so it'll stick to the side of the jar. It said to paint wax onto the lavender so it'll stick to the side of the jar. Thank goodness for editing, because this was probably a 15-minute process just to figure out what that meant. This was not fun. So in the end, I realized that adding a glob of wax to the bottom and sticking the bottom, the base of the stem of the lavender, into the wax and kind of letting it cool in position was the best way to do it. But in the end, they all ended up moving anyways. So if you guys decide to do a dried lavender candle, don't put as much time and effort into it as I did, because this was all for naught, because the hot wax went in, melted the pre-existing wax, and then all the lavender bits just floated everywhere. Look, they're already, I poured all over the counter. They're already falling off. So at this point, I just decided to embrace it and just chuck a bunch of lavender in there. I didn't even care where it went or how it fell. It's just going to be a lavender explosion in this thing. I hope a metaphorical, smell explosion and not a literal explosion, because that would make it a really bad gift. And finally, our completed candles after a couple hours of cooling down and trimming the wicks. This one is the bergamot scented one with the cute little canister that I've tied with twine and a little bookmark to add just a bit of texture. And here is the lavender candle that I have a love-hate relationship with. It did end up looking cool, but it just didn't turn out the way that I had anticipated. I think it'll still make a great gift. It just doesn't have any of those stems that I took forever painfully individually placing on the outside, but I think it's still going to smell amazing and make a great gift. And our super sweet little candy dish, I think it's a candy dish one, double wicks, and I scented this one with bergamot and lavender just to give it a nice complex scent. And here it is again without the ribbon on it. You can see a little bit of wax on the edge from my overpour, but that should be pretty easy to clean up before I give it to somebody. And then finally, my apple cinnamon candle that very clearly I'm keeping for myself. I'm not sharing this one. This one's mine. I'm keeping it because it smells delicious and I love the little bowl that it's in. So maybe the DIY is not for gifting. Maybe it's just to feed Jamie's insatiable need for candles in her life. So what do you guys think? They turned out so stinking cute. I'm so happy with these. If you're giving these as gifts, I'm personally a huge fan of dressing them up appropriately. So obviously for this lavender candle, even though this one's probably the biggest disappointment for me, but whatever, it's fine. I decided to wrap a jute ribbon around it and add even more dried lavender. So this looks like something that you picked up at a little posh shop, and you're like, oh, I spent $30 on this candle, but you didn't. You didn't spend $30 on it. You just zhuzhed it up effectively, so now it looks fancy as heck. So which one's your favorite? Because I can't quite decide. And honestly, I'm kind of bummed that I used all the cute looking candle holders for this video, because now I feel pressured to give them as gifts and I want to keep them. So maybe that just means I have to make more in uglier containers so I can give those away and I can keep these. That's a great plan. So that's what we have for today, folks. Thank you so much for stopping by. If you haven't done so already, like this video if you like the video, and subscribe to this channel, not for tips and tricks. Nope. Guys, having 2 channels is weird. Okay. And until next week, bye guys.